Hi, welcome to Love Brave. This is video number one, video conversation number one. Hi, Matt.
Hey Heidi, how you doing today? Looking forward to Love Spoken.
Me too. Love spoken, speaking truth in love. I think both those elements are so important, and it's just so easy to leave one out. It's so easy to speak truth with zero love, and it's so easy to speak love and no truth. And we want to try to put those together in order to love the bravest that we can out there in the world.
Absolutely, and just thinking, even in every aspect of our culture today, as we have conversations, whether it's in the church, conversations in the home, conversations in the community, or just in the world, even on social media, there are a lot of issues when it comes to talking to each other and not just past each other.
It's so true, and I think understanding that listening is a huge portion of that. And so you and I are going to practice that too. I think that's kind of cool that we're going to have to be active engagers in this loving brave as we share the conversation. And so that is going to be a challenge for us, because all of us are sinners learning how to communicate well. And so I'm excited to see people's responses in the comments too, to be part of the conversation, just adding in whatever that stands out to them that we talk about, maybe some concerns, some questions, and we're going to have a conversation in those YouTube show notes when we put it out on Facebook and everything. That's the point. Conversation, not just Matt and Heidi talking.
Absolutely, and being able to take some of that input and respond to it is something I'm looking forward to, at least with the study. And just thinking, are we in our culture, are we in the conversation you and I are having, are we actually listening to what other people are saying so that we can hear who they are and what they're sharing? Or, as was popularized in a movie back in the 90s, are we just waiting for our turn to speak?
Oh, that's good.
Are we just waiting for the dead silence so we can jump in there with the thing we wanted to say instead of actually listening to what was going on?
Yeah, I think so too. And so one thing I think that goes with that I had written down is our default in our culture tends to be, especially in online communication, but I think the way that we respond to each other is some distrust, which comes out as anger a lot of the time. And that can be a really dangerous place to be in then when we're trying to have real vulnerable conversations bravely. Any kind of hot topic, and maybe people can throw up in the comments some topics that really incite, emotions and that are difficult to have. But what do you think about that default? Where are we at as a culture when we're trying to speak love, speak truth?
Whenever I think about online commenting in particular, and the harsh difficulty that you have when trying to present something, I think of a comic by XKCD. It's just this nerdy math comic most of the times, but they had a panel where the guy's sitting at his computer and he's typing, and the wife says, "Hey, honey, come to bed," and he says to his wife, "I can't. Somebody is wrong on the internet." What do you want me to do? Just let them be wrong? And that's one of the hardest things I find, is especially if I'm going to jump into a comment section, or if I'm going to jump into somebody's Facebook post. Are people really going to have their minds changed or their worldview altered because I dropped a truth bomb on them without any context or love in their life? Most times, no, and probably I can alienate them a lot more than I can approach them if I'm just jumping into a comment section and getting in a fight with some family member or some random person with whom I don't have a great relationship.
Right. I think we experience communication on a spectrum of like complete apathy, complacency and that end of it, to caring altogether too much for stuff that isn't our business or isn't the place for it, and so where's that middle of like caring about stuff and not just checking out, but being in a place where people can be wrong, like you said. What is the point of grace if it isn't to allow mistakes and we're going to be wrong? And that maybe it's even better. Sometimes God does his best work in the weaknesses of us being wrong and allowing people then to be wrong. it's really complicated. We want to care,
Right.
but we also don't want to maybe overreact. Sometimes when we hear about a specific topic in particular, our emotions, even though, we don't like to really even recognize our emotions half the time, but they well up and then they're just there. How do you go to bed? How do you lay down next to your spouse and be like, well, someone's wrong on the internet, Yeah. Surprise, surprise.
Well, I think the aspects too, where you think about anger as the default posture, like you were saying, it's not something that you necessarily want to wade into when you know that if you share something, you might just get instantly attacked. If you have an opportunity to speak truth, even in love with someone else, a lot of times I would say get offline. Take it to a cup of coffee, take it to a glass of your preferred beverage, and see the person that you're actually wanting to communicate with. Because if you want to speak to someone, it's probably not best to do it through a keyboard. It's probably not best to do it from miles away. It's in my opinion, in the ways that I've tried to handle things, at least, is to do it face to face, or if that gap's just way too far, to do it via phone call, but actually have it so that you're speaking to one another and engaging in that way, because it can be easy to stoke someone's anger and to get them to respond really negatively by just having a typed conversation or a text message conversation.
I love that. So one thing I'm hearing you say is loving brave is going to look really different online than it's going to look face to face. We're gonna need to be able to delineate what is appropriate for online conversation, and when it does need to be taken face to face. And maybe I think there's a braveness in engaging in face to face more often. I don't want to just totally knock social media, because I love it. I do love it. I think it has its place, and it does build community, and it has a lot of problems too, but so does, groups, and so does going out for coffee with someone that, I don't know, is maybe codependent. I don't know. There's a lot of problems with regular relationships too.
Well, and I think one of the things with your social media thing is, I try as often as I can, if I'm going to be a part of a social media conversation, I want it to be positive. And so if it starts to veer towards the negative, I'm probably going to disengage. I'm probably going to mute the conversation. I'm probably going to step back, because I want the things that I spend my time on and the places that I engage to be positive. And so it's a lot harder if you start getting to an argument with somebody else. That's the time I'd say step back and say, this is probably not the best way to have a conversation about it. But if you're mutually encouraging someone, and if you're uplifting your brother or sister in Christ, or you're just trying to bring some positivity to a place that just doesn't have a lot, then I think that's where social media especially can be a positive place for connecting folks that might not otherwise be connected.
Right. I think that is really important. The fact that we can share hope is always, I think, one of our first goals when we walk into any venue. That doesn't mean we're not going to talk about hard stuff. It doesn't mean we're not going to bring up really difficult topics and share and suffer together and bring truth to the situation. However, our framework is always hope. Always hope. And if we haven't left, any of those in-person conversations, family conversations, when I drop off my kids at school, or when I end an argument with my spouse, if I haven't left hope, then, maybe that's a place that I can work on loving brave, where I can bring more hope as I bring truth, and light to the situation. And I think your family conversations are actually the place that we're not really talking about, that are more difficult, because you feel like you can kind of maybe say anything and say it any which way,
Yeah, I mean, we have a habit in my house where we do the best we can to gather around the dinner table every day, as often as we can, do highs and lows and talk about life together, and yet at the same time, like, every conversation that I have with those Schuler people aren't always positive, right? We've got to work on even me to them to me, husband to wife, parents to children, children to parents. All those things can really, be great places to start talking about, what does it mean to live truth in your lives in the classroom, or in the playground, or places like that. So it's kind of an interesting place to start, because if our kids have these conversations, and if we do, are they going to be equipped to talk to somebody about a difficult place that they're going through, death in the family, or a diagnosis, or something that maybe they would not have otherwise been equipped to handle. So I love to start, with those family conversations, with those person to person, knowing that, man, when I fail, I've got to ask my kids for forgiveness. And when they fail, they ask us for forgiveness.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much braveness in that, being able to have a safe place where we can confess and say, listen, I mess up, and I messed up here. Please forgive me. And I just think God does his best work there. I mean, that's who Jesus is, in our homes, in our relationships, in our workplaces, wherever, is when that moment happens. And it's like, wow, there was forgiveness here.
Absolutely. And I think with Jesus in particular, when you're looking at how he interacts with his closest disciples, failure is an option. Failure is always regular, and he always seeks to restore them. I was talking through a Bible study the other night about the difference between Peter and Judas. Both of them betrayed Jesus. Both of them cast Jesus aside, but it was Peter who came back to Jesus with a posture of confession. And sadly, that just wasn't the case with Judas. But it was still an opportunity to say, hey, there's a difference in the way that we respond when we fail. And we can either lose hope and lose heart, or we can look to the one who gives hope and restores our hearts. Yeah. And I think that's the aspect where, when we're speaking the truth in love, we've got to come across, like you said, as hope bearers, as people who are filled with hope in the midst of every situation, especially the difficult ones that we have personally. Yeah. And being transparent about that.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. So in these videos, we seek to kind of discuss 3 questions. And so we kind of covered, what's the issue is our first question usually. Communication's hard. It's complicated. We're going to be wrong. And there needs to be grace, and connecting truth and love. But then we're just touching on now, I think, that big question of, how does God love Brave? What is he doing in this? Wow. I mean, we're never going to be God, and I think that's an important recognition. Like, our goal here isn't to be, right? It isn't to be God, or to be God-like. Yeah, we got to take that pressure off, man. But the fact that, I love what you said about Peter and Jesus, that safe relationship that God offers with us, where we can be wrong, and we can make the mistakes. Also, that we can proclaim something. It's a very open conversation with God. Like, when we sit down and we're like, I don't know what to do with life, God. Whether we're opening our Bibles, or whether we're doing prayer, or whether we're just thinking, God is in all of that. The word helps guide us, and I think that's really important to recognize. Like, sometimes when we just have open thoughts, God, what are you doing? Sometimes the answers we get are maybe not the best to follow, and so staying in God's word does help us to know who in the world we're talking to. But he does do it bravely. He brings up hard stuff, and he reprimands us sometimes, but it's safe, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, and there's a challenge to even approaching God, I believe. When you think about who he is and what he does, and every aspect of his character, man, I feel unprepared. And you think about God's perfection and how imperfect I am and how imperfect we all are, and yet that's not something that God allows to separate us. He comes and seeks after us, runs after us, makes us his own, restores us, places his son Jesus as a covering for us, so that when he looks at us, he is pleased with every aspect of our person because he sees his son. And for me, this is an aspect where you could ask the question: Does God care? About speaking the truth in love? That was the note you had written down. Does God care? And I think absolutely he does. And Jesus is never one to stray away from the truth, but he's always seeking to do it in a way that draws people to him. And the challenge I believe comes in when he says something that we don't expect or that we don't like, or that challenges one of our preconceived ideals.
Or something we want to do. I mean,
right?
Like, I like my life, and sometimes I want it to look a certain way. And if God says something that I don't like, it's very easy to be like, sort of over this relationship, God.
Well, how many holes would you have in your Bible if you cut out everything you didn't like? I mean, it'd probably be like the Thomas Jefferson Bible that's just like full of holes. And because I mean, there's all sorts of things. God aims directly at me. And takes me down with the harsh word of his law. He kills me dead, and it's from that death, the washing of the water and the word, the death I die, is how he can raise me from the dead, how he can raise me to new life, because it's an aspect where if I didn't have his word kind of exposing who I was, I wouldn't need his word also proclaiming his great love and grace. So it's a double-edged sword, as is often referred to.
Yeah, I like how our lead passage, that 1 Corinthians says, rejoicing in the truth. God rejoices in the truth. He doesn't hammer. He rejoices. And I think that's quite a bit of a different picture. And, Matt, it brings to mind people, especially outside the church, I think that it's important to remember that God doesn't love us less in our sin. Like, he can't abide by sin, but we're all, like, so darn sinful. I mean, not one is any better. And I think we like to make a big deal out of certain things, certain sins, and make them darker and more evil. And so we cut off love. We stop loving Brave because we don't know what to do with that particular sin. But God, he just keeps loving through that. The relationship is certainly different. It certainly changes. And maybe there's that loss of intimacy, when we push away his son and his truth. But I want people to know that God doesn't love us less. His heart breaks. But I think that's one thing that happens when you're having conversations with so many people in our life. We're trying to love Brave with people that don't know Jesus. And certainly some people watching aren't going to know Jesus or want to know Jesus. And I think that's important that that's an okay place to be in. We're going to walk that together. That's part of loving Brave. And that's what God does for us. He doesn't ask us to be in a different place. He leads us through that valley.
Exactly, and he leads us. It's an invitation he offers to us, and I think there's a difference with how we approach people in conversation that I think has changed over the years. I think there's an aspect where it used to be that Christians would lead with accusation. We would be quick to point out, hey, here's what's wrong with you, while certainly ignoring some of our own faults. But the approach I try to encourage people to take is one of invitation. Are you welcoming somebody along the path of following Jesus? Are you having that conversation with someone and saying, similar to the first calling of the disciples, I've got show you this person that has changed everything in my life. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. And, I think the world responds today, is there anything good that comes from Nazareth? I think it's the same question. And our response needs to be come and see, because it'll be God who convicts them. It will be God who calls them from death to life. And we just get to invite people to follow Jesus. He's the one that does the hard work. We're the ones that get to do the fun invitational work. So I don't have to be the one to save my friend or my family member. I can be the one that shows up at a conversation, shows up with love, shows up with compassion when they're going through loss and mourning, organizes a food drive so that their family doesn't have to cook meals, and maybe comes over with a 6-pack and says, hey, here is my love. I'm just going to sit and I'm going to let you I'm going to let you speak. I'm going to let you wrestle with God and look through the Psalms. Plenty of examples of people yelling at God, angry with God. God, don't you remember who you are? God didn't forget who he is, but it's us who sometimes forget his great love and the endurance and the eternal nature of that love.
Yeah, I think that is really a great answer to that final question for our videos, which is, how do we go out and love brave then? Come and see. What a great phrase, for both people who know Jesus and people who don't, almost in every single situation, like you said, bringing that action, sitting with, and then using words that say, come and see, just come and see. And I'm going to do that with you because I am in no better place than you are. And I think that's being brave to admit that. And we don't know. That's the bravest place we can be in. But we're going to do it together. We're going to do this together, this hard thing. And that's what God does for us. And we can just reach out and do that for other people. So Matt, our challenge question then throughout our whole study is, who and how can I go love brave today? So I would just say, let's leave that for the hearer, the listener, the viewer, and say, share with us, how are we going to do that? How are we going to urge each other on to brave love, and that going out, just doing it, whether that's in our home and all the other places and spaces we go. Who and how can you love brave today? Especially with words, love spoken. That's our topic. So any final thoughts, Matt?
I think one of the great things is that God works even when we fail. So we might go out and we might love brave, and we might just fall down completely,
just smash it.
And I mean, we might offend someone. We might hurt their feelings. Right. We might just even look foolish ourselves. And and the aspect there is that God values the attempt, and God works in our attempt, even when we feel like, oh wow, that was an abysmal failure. God's still at work. God's still doing the work of salvation. And if we plant the seed, and if we share His truth in love, it's going to do what God purposes it to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. I love it. All right, so go out, love brave. We'll see you next time.
Great first week. See you, Heidi.